Hello and welcome to the St. Andrews Society of Los Angeles podcast. Each episode will bring you the latest news from the St. Andrews Society of Los Angeles, as well as fascinating interviews with entertainment personalities, government leaders, and community advocates. St. Andrews Society of Los Angeles, where Scotland meets the City of Angels. Let's get started. Our guest today is Brian Baglow. Brian is the founder of the Scottish Games Network. He is also an entrepreneur, a university lecturer, a marketing expert, a writer, and the leading authority for the video games and interactive media industries. Brian is also known for working on the largest entertainment franchise in the world, Grand Theft Auto. Please welcome Brian Baglow. Our host today is Joanna Lewis. Joanna is the owner of Simply Podcasting and the founder and host of the LA Music Video Awards.
So I am currently speaking to you from the East Coast. I'm just outside Edinburgh. I'm the next region along, a place called East Lothian. And to give you some sense of it, it's basically all beaches and golf courses. It goes beach, golf course, beach, beach. So beautiful, sandy, seas, blue sky most of the time. But I'm originally from just north of here, a place called Fife. So that's the bit between Edinburgh and Dundee on the east coast. Hence the charming accent, although it has been softened because I've been off and lived in places like London and New York and so on and so forth. So the original twang has got a little softer. This is my professional podcast voice.
To me, you're like one of the pioneers in the video game world. So I have to ask, what was the first video game you played?
Wow, the first game that I played. Well, we're going all the way back to the 1970s. And in the 70s, if you remember, video games kind of appeared in the public conscience for the first time. So you could go to arcades, so these horrible, sticky, dark places where you had to have, in my case, a pocket full of 10 pences or quarters, I guess, as it was in the US. And you could play games like Spy Hunter and Star Wars and Gorf. So it was all of the old arcade games. I think probably my favorite was Spy Hunter because I got to pretend to be James Bond.
And I love that. And those sticky arcade rooms, they have a resurgence and are making a comeback. There's so many where that's like a niche bar now, where they have all those old arcade games and then dress up night and things like that.
It's still very cool, it was if you go back to the 1980s, the original Tron, the idea of owning my own arcade, like Flynn's Arcade, was absolutely an aspiration. As it stands, I have hopes that I can build my own kind of arcade setup. But who knows? They're increasingly sought after and quite expensive. So I might just go the emulation route and play stuff on my laptop.
Yes. What are your thoughts on that? Like the old video games kind of making this again a resurgence, for lack of a better word, where people are like, hey, we've still got these really great graphics and these really great storylines on these games, but there's nothing like playing the old Spy Hunter or Tron or Qbert.
Yeah, it is. So it's a really interesting question because the games industry doesn't have the same kind of back catalogue that you find in music and movies and so many of the other areas of the creative industries, because the devices, the hardware, ages so quickly. So when I first started playing the very early 1980s, it was the home computer revolution. And so literally none of those devices exist outside museums and personal collections anymore. But it's one of these areas, because there's always new content, there's always new games. They'll be producing Call of Duty and FIFA and all of these games every year until the end of time. So we've never really kind of had the opportunity to build that back catalogue. But now, of course, with everything being in the cloud, everything being online, and so much of the old hardware being so easily emulated, it's really opening the market up. And you're seeing on your Xbox, your PlayStation, the Nintendo Switch store, the chance to go back and play some of these old classics. And I had a really interesting meeting with the National Library of Scotland a few weeks ago, because they're desperate to try and kind of start an archive, start a collection, and make sure that none of these games are being lost. But we need the legislation to change in order to allow us to sort of capture things and emulate it. And then who owns the rights when a company was bought, and then the company that bought the company was bought, and then it collapsed. And so there's lots of issues around this. But I think we're getting there. We're slowly working out exactly what we need to do. And I think you're going to be able to see more and more of games from the sort of the 70s, 80s and afterwards available legally for people to play in the near future.
Nice, nice. I know that one of your long-term goals is to make Scotland one of the best places to make video games. What are some of the steps being taken to make that a reality? I know you just mentioned the National Archives trying to preserve games, but what are some of the steps being made to create them as well?
Well, I think one of the things we're lacking at the moment is kind of an organization dedicated to video games and looking at the games sector from an ecosystem perspective. The industry perspective that a lot of people have, it's if you're not making or publishing video games, then you're not part of it. But you can already see that games are so much more than that. You know, the tools and tech from the world of video games are going to be fundamental to the emergence of the metaverse. You know, so many of the tools being used there are come from games. Likewise, in the screen sector, you know, the whole film industry is more and more reliant on the tools from games. The Unreal Engine, the Unity engine are powering almost everything coming out of Disney in terms of Marvel and Star Wars and so on and so forth. So there's a much, much bigger role to play, and games, I think, have the potential to be a transformative power. You know, we want to reimagine education. You've got to have the games people at the table. You want to talk about social inclusion, you know, mental health and well-being. Again, we've got so much to offer on those areas. But right now, we don't have any organization in Scotland that's really kind of taking that agenda forward. And things are moving so very quickly that, you know, government simply can't keep up. You know, they're not in a place where they can really start to kind of lead on that. So what I'm trying to do right now, following the success of the first Scottish Games Week back in 22, is really build this cluster and actually create this organisation that can pull together all of these different organisations, from the galleries and libraries all the way through to the government, the public sector, and all of the different organisations that need to be involved in understanding and aligning the support for games. So that's kind of something that I saw a gap in the market, and I thought, I clearly have enough time on my schedule to do this. That sounds like a great way to spend it.
Said the person who has absolutely no time, I'm sure.
It's a little busy.
It's just a bit.
I love music, and video game music is always amazing. I remember the very first video game song that I ever paid attention to was this math game in Atari's in television. I don't know if you remember this.
System.
Oh yes. Yeah.
But it had this really cool kind of jam to it, and in what you do and all of the hats that you've worn, how important is video game music?
Huge. It's hugely important, and it's hugely important to me because one of my first projects when I joined the games industry back in sort of 1993-ish. Oh my God, that makes it 30 years this year. Okay, feeling old. But one of my first projects, I don't know if you can see this poster in the background. There was the original Grand Theft Auto, and one of the things that I was the writer, and so one of the things I ended up doing was writing lyrics for the heavy metal and the country and western tracks in the game, along with coming up with band names and track names and all sorts. And you know, that game kind of really made a huge impact in terms of its music and in terms of its audio, because as you jump in and out of cars, the radio stations change, and it kind of quite groundbreaking, because nobody had thought about it outside, you know, just the start a track, you know, play the score all the way through. So from the earliest days, I've been a huge fan, and I was lucky enough to work with some incredibly pioneering people who really pushed and advocated for audio. Because in the games world, it tends to be the graphics that get all of the attention because new technology, shiny, bigger, better, faster, more polygons, more explosions. But it's the audio that really kind of captures you emotionally. And it's, the reason that we have orchestral concerts today, that we've had video games live touring the world. Just at the start of this month, we had the Royal Scottish National Orchestra doing a couple of nights of video games music with everything from Halo to Kingdom Hearts. And they were packed out, sold out, because they speak to people, and they're such an incredibly important part. And unlike a TV program or a movie where you can maybe hear a snippet of a song once, if you're in a level of a video game, you can hear that song over and over and over for hours. Entire weekends can be lost trying to complete a particular level. So it's enormously important. And I think it's only in the last sort of 5-6 years that we've really been lucky enough to have it all taken seriously. So I've got two amazing friends, Lucy and Louise, who are DJs, and they both have radio shows here in the UK dedicated to game soundtracks. So they're on there every week. They're playing the latest from the indie games market, from the huge blockbusters, and from some of the incredible emerging experimental and experiential games that are coming out of the odder end of the game sector.
As a fan of the soundtrack for Grand Theft Auto, I have to thank you, because I was not the person who was playing the game. I was the sibling who had to sit next to the people playing the game. So my brothers played, and they would just hop in car to car to car, and I'm like, no, go in that car, because I think that's going to be a full soundtrack. No, go in that car, because I think that was going to be a full soundtrack. That was the only input I had during those days, was getting that car because I want to hear what song comes on next.
That's very kind, but we didn't have any money. So the original Grand Theft Auto was at the point of being shut down for about 4 years because it didn't hold together. It wasn't playable. And so we really did it on a shoestring. So all of the tracks were recorded by the audio team at DMA Design in Dundee. But what we decided to do, and what I, in my wisdom decided to do, pretend they were all real artists. So we came up with band names, we came up with album titles and everything. We took some moody shots of various members of the audio department standing in, urban decay or outside in the rare sunshine. And we just made it up, and we pretended. And of course, the soundtracks of GTA are now multi-million pound or $1 million concerns who pull in licensed tracks from the biggest artists from the 80s and 90s and whatever suits the genre. But the original, we pretended that we had licensed it because nobody would give us the money to go out and get proper bands. So it worked. Hooray, thank you.
It did work, because I was one of those kids who was at Tower Records trying to find this random band that didn't exist because I wanted that CD because that song was so good.
It's the nice thing now is that they kind of sunk into the sort of the global consciousness. If you go on YouTube, you can find people doing ska versions of them. You can find people doing, metalcore versions of them. You can find all sorts of covers of people doing the soundtrack from the original Grand Theft Auto. If I had any kind of royalties, I would be so very happy. But as it stands, I just have to be thrilled and delighted that people like them. I have to point out, I was a very small part of a big team, and it was an incredibly talented team. So I just got to write the words for a couple of them. So I have no musical ability outside that. But yeah, I think they really stand up. They really kind of hold up, even 25, 26 years down the line. It was a game that I'm very, very glad that I had a small part to play in.
That's great. So you've worn many hats, from design, PR, marketing, everything that we've even talked about. What has been the most challenging role for you, And how has that helped you with starting the Scottish Games Network?
What was the most challenging role? Okay, so back in 2002, I started my own agency. And what I wanted to do was do PR, marketing, communications. It's what I ended up doing at DMA Design. Then when I moved to New York with Rockstar, I kind of ended up doing more of that. And so that was my plan. But then what actually happened was I ended up doing so much more because companies in the games world tend to be quite focused on making games. And so they like making games. What they don't like is all the other stuff. So it ends up being business development. It ends up being licensing. It ends up being finding office space. It ends up figuring out payroll. It's like, who can we partner with? Who can we find work for hire with? Who can we do all of these things? So that was a bit of a baptism of fire, because I went in going, okay, here's how we do the communications, and then ended up doing a lot more for several of our clients and our agencies. So just learning how the industry worked, and in some cases didn't work, was incredible. So we ended up helping companies, secure equity investment. We ended up helping a couple of clients to exit. They ended up being sold, acquired by bigger companies. And so it was really, that was almost 8 years of complete bedlam, just trying to figure out the games industry. And over that period, that was from 2002 up until 2010, that took in the launch of the iPhone, the launch of the App Store the following year, which was madly disruptive for games. It completely transformed the game sector almost overnight. And then, of course, the sort of financial crisis, which finished the whole lot off. So it was a bit of a roller coaster, I think it's fair to say, Joanna.
Yeah. Well, talking about things that disrupted the industry, we can't not mention AI here. So
I think we need to.
We do. What are your thoughts on AI in the gaming industry? And actually, what are your thoughts on AI overall?
So it's really interesting. So in my other life, with one of my other hats on, I run a podcast focusing on the mobile games market here in the UK. And I spoke to one of the agencies out there, one of the studios, I beg your pardon, that is using AI to kind of craft narrative. And so, you're telling a story, but a lot of the dialogue, a lot of the interaction that you have with characters is built by AI. And it's very, very early days. So I know that a lot of people are worried about, the AI stepping in and being able to automate everything from coding and programming through to art, modeling, rigging, etc. Just everything is susceptible. But the one constant in the games world is change. From the very earliest days, technology has moved forward, and we've had to adapt and accommodate that. So the iPhone came along. Everyone thought it was really pretty, but it was the following year when the App Store launched, and then that introduced whole new business models. The impact of the mobile market has been colossal. It's absolutely changed the games industry, and I think AI is going to be exactly the same. As it stands right now, I think the generative AI is going to be used to find ways of simplifying things, finding efficiencies, and leveling the playing field. I can see there being a whole generation of tools coming out that will make it easier for smaller companies to kind of increase their output and produce more complex, more kind of nuanced games. Further down the road than that, I think, it's just speculation, because we don't know. We really don't know where the whole AI thing is going to go. I've been playing around with it, with the chat GPT, a lot of the sort of the competitors, the mid journeys, and so on and so forth. It's really good fun, but I haven't found a practical use for it as yet. And I think everybody's kind of waiting. It's once we see a lot of the big tool sets, the game engines, start to incorporate it or offer it as plugins or marketplace options, I think we'll start to see games becoming more complex where needed. It's going to simplify a lot of the drudgery and the the rules. I'm hoping it's not going to be writing lyrics for heavy metal tracks anytime soon, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see. That's the thing; it could be truly transformative, but at the moment, everybody's kind of scrabbling to kind of keep up and figure out what's needed. And I think this is the thing about technology, and what we're seeing, globally is a bit of a backlash against the whole notion of big tech, where it's really, you know, being controlled and being sort of moderated by these enormous software giants. And so the interesting thing is, in the games world, we're having a bit of a backlash, a bit of reaction to a lot of that. And it's all about, the power in the hands of independent creators and that direct connection between the game creator and their audience, which is something that just wasn't possible way back in the mist of time when I started. So I think there's an authenticity, and I think there's a trust and credibility issue. And games have really kind of pioneered a lot of that. There's a huge amount of passion in the games world that can be used for, absolute good, or it can be more toxic than you can imagine. But I think we really do have an opportunity to kind of channel it and help creators, be more authentic and really bring their visions to life in new ways. So, I guess I'm painting myself into the positive and benign corner.
That's a good corner to paint yourself into, though.
Well, it helps me sleep at night.
Yes. Talking about innovation and how things have changed, what is your take on like Twitch gaming, like people going online and playing video games on platforms like Twitch and on YouTube, and that very strong subculture that's been created because of that?
Yeah, I mean, well, let's be honest. I'm 52 years old. It confuses the hell out of me. No, I'm teasing. But it is one of those things. So I have kids in their 20s, and so they've been part of this whole subculture. They've really enjoyed the whole kind of streaming and content creation culture for years now, and it's enormous for a reason, and because it gives people a different way to engage. You don't necessarily have to play a game yourself, play a game directly to kind of really know it and understand it from the outside in, because you can now go and watch other people doing it. So I've watched this. I've kind of spoken to a lot of the content creators out there on YouTube and Twitch and the like, and it's a very different approach, and you could add the whole esports approach into that as well, which is playing games professionally or for a fee or competitively. And so they all tie together, but they kind of run parallel to the games industry rather than being an integral part of it. So it's the game creators can use it. And, a lot of games are built, published specifically to address that market, but they don't have to be, and so it then becomes a choice on the part of the game developer whether or not they want to go down that route, whether they want to engage with the sort of the streaming market. So it's very interesting, because I think from my world, from the industry, the content creators, the game developers, we're kind of feeling our way, and we can see some of the big companies, Riot Games, who do League of Legends and so on, really sort of have leapt in. They've embraced it. There's a whole enormous audience out there who absolutely love what they do. But equally, there are just as many, if not more, studios out there making games who are going, that's not kind of where we see ourselves. We're still publishing games where we want people to sit and play, and whether it's alone or competitively or collaboratively. But it's an interesting new addition to the mix. And I find it very, very interesting that the traditional kind of broadcast sector, the television and production companies and so on, the public service broadcaster of the BBC here in the UK, are just staying the heck away from it, because they're like, we don't know what this is. We're all a bit scared.
Yeah, I have. In Vegas, there is an esports arena that doesn't get much love or attention, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But it is definitely something that I thought would have been bigger out here even.
Well, I think it's coming through. I think it's coming through. You know, obviously out in Southeast Asia, out in South Korea specifically, but into Japan, across the whole region, esports is enormous, and that's really where it's been pioneered. And even within the US and Europe, it is coming. You know, likewise, we're having a 4,000 seat esports arena built in Dundee. You know, which is kind of the home of games in Scotland. And it still confuses a lot of people. They're like, but why? What, watching other people play games? So I think it's emerging, but that market is growing. You know, the number of people who are engaged in esports and streaming is growing. It's a subculture of its own, you know, but it's a huge and kind of rapidly evolving one. So I think we're going to see an awful lot more acceptance, but it might just take another few years. I think we're going to need a little more cultural shift for it to be really embraced by the mainstream. You know,
Okay.
I still occasionally get people, you know, yelling and pounding the table at me going, "It's not sports." I'm like, okay, yeah. They tend to be wearing knitwear and have been on a golf course. So it's like, well, you know, that's just a good walk ruined. So maybe your opinion's not the one that's going to sway me.
Right, right. I know that a lot of schools out here uh, are looking at video game design as part of like the education curriculum. Is that the same case in Scotland? And if it is, how is that being embraced by teachers and the government and parents?
Well, weirdly enough, so I don't know if you of the listeners know this, but Scotland was a real pioneer back in the 1990s. So Abertay University up in Dundee was the very first university in the world to offer a video games degree. Right, so way back in the 1970s, no, the 1990s, we were the place where you had to come if you wanted to get a degree in video game design, development, and production. So they've now been joined by hundreds of institutions around the world, but we've got a really, really strong kind of sense. We have 7 universities in the country and 11 colleges, all offering games qualifications. And one of the things I want to do with this cluster, this organization I'm trying to build, is kind of move that backwards into the earlier years, into primary and secondary education, because I think games have a much, much bigger role to play in classrooms. You know, games are a way of helping people learn while they're engaged. If people are having fun, they learn much better. We know this, but we're not embracing the opportunity. So one of the studios here in Scotland, 4J, who are based up in Dundee, it's 4J Studios because the city used to be known as the city of the 3Js, jute, jam, and journalism, because that was where you had jute, you know, all of the big textile mills, journalism, because there's a big sort of family-owned media empire, nothing like the Murdochs, but you know, much more benign, a lot more comic focused, and jam, because marmalade comes from Dundee.
Oh, okay.
Weirdly enough, 4J added an additional J, which is joysticks. So they're the company behind the console versions of Minecraft, which has sold 200 million copies and is still selling. Now owned by Microsoft, but it's arguably the single biggest piece of educational content in the world, because it's collaborative, it's creative. Kids can go and build things. You know, I have a 6-year-old who has just discovered it through a whole bunch of friends, and so we're just starting to learn how to make things in Minecraft, and it's a total joy. So, but if we've got kids who come home and want to spend 2 hours playing with Minecraft, they want to spend 2 hours in Roblox or whatever the latest title is, we can use that. We can use that time and attention and engagement, I think, far more effectively within an educational context to help them learn. So I really want to try and have Scotland come back into this pioneering role in terms of its understanding and use of games in an educational context. So watch this space.
Yes, this is an exciting space, and there are a lot of apps out here and even some schools out here, like extracurricular schools out here that are focusing on game development for younger kids. And so you're right, this is an exciting space. So let's talk about your organization for a bit.
Gosh, okay. So the Scottish Games Network has been around in various incarnations since 2004. And way back when I started it as a Yahoo group, if you can remember all that far back. And it was just at the point where the sector really started to grow. And so not everybody knew each other. Not everybody had worked at one of the sort of the 6 big companies that we had back in the mid-90s. And so it started purely as a social, a social forum. And it's kind of grown and evolved and changed over the years because so many of the organizations over here, from the government down, are really interested in the games market. They look at it and they see there's something here, but we're not entirely sure what it is. And so back in 2015, we kind of became the de facto industry body. So we basically took over the advisory role to help people understand more about the game sector, advocate for the game sector, really get out in front of the governments, both in Scotland and the UK, and provide the sort of the advice, research, data, and so on and so forth. And then back in 2021, I managed to tap into some funding from the Scottish Government to help build this big event called Scottish Games Week. And the goal is really a little bit like Tartan Week. It's designed to be a platform to really kind of shout about, showcase, and highlight all of the incredible work being done, not just here in Scotland, but by Scots all over the world, because we have people working, with all the big games publishers, all of the big software companies, all of the sort of the pioneers and tech leaders out there. So it's really trying to sort of call on the Scottish diaspora, get them to sort of talk about what they're doing, and just really create a focal point around video games in Scotland. Because for a lot of people, they know 2 things about the game sector in Scotland. One is that we have one, and it's been about for a while. And the other thing that a lot of people tend to tell me is it punches above its weight, which indeed it does. But when you ask them for details, they go, we make Grand Theft Auto, don't we? I'm like, yes, that's one thing. But what, and so they don't know anything about the rest of this incredible ecosystem. 7 universities, 11 colleges, 174 studios at my last count, and about the same again in terms of independent, part-time creators and so on and so forth. So there's a huge community. There's a massive amount of incredible work going on here that covers everything from, installation and experiential work, through some of the art collectives, all the way through to sort of the huge blockbusters, Grand Theft Auto, Minecraft, etc., etc., etc. But, I know my peers and colleagues, and sometimes they can be a little shy about standing up in front of people and being enthusiastic. So I thought this was a way of really trying to highlight all of the incredible things that are happening here and put us in front of a global audience and go, we're quite good at this games thing. You should come and talk to us.
Yes, I love it. I absolutely love it. And you're right. A lot of people don't know about, especially outside of Scotland, don't know that Scotland has such a robust gaming industry, because people tend to think New York, San Francisco, LA, and Japan and South Korea.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Well, and that's the thing, but we've kind of led the way in a lot of areas. So, we've been talking about LA and about the big E3 Games Expo that used to take place annually. So way back in about, 1993 or 94, Scotland was there collectively. We were the first country in the world to have a sort of collective presence out at E3, and we pulled in all the studios, all the game creators who were present at that time to go out and go, it's welcome. And then, of course, we did a whiskey tasting, because you can't get away with not doing a whiskey tasting, which made us very popular. And then we fast forward to 2021, 22, and, pretty much every country in the world is doing that out at E3. You know, you've got Brazil, and you've got Ecuador, and you've got Norway, and you've got Baltic states, and so, you know, it's like, it took you a little while, folks, but you know, it's we see what you're doing here. So it's an enormous and enormous and really creative industry. I think it has so much more potential than anybody really suspects, because when you look at the ecosystem, you look at all the ways in which games can be applied and used in other areas outside mere entertainment. We've got a lot to offer. And so I want to take Scotland back into the forefront and make us the most connected, collaborative, and kind of ecosystem games region in the world.
Nice. Well, that is ambitious, and I think that you can definitely do that. Which kind of leads me to the final question, which is, what is on the horizon for you and for the Scottish Games Network?
So at the moment, we're deep into the planning for Scottish Games Week 2023, hashtag SGW23. And so that's going to be taking place across Scotland at the end of October. So October the 30th to November the 3rd. And we're opening in Edinburgh this year, then taking our education symposium to Dundee. Then we've got the Scottish Games Awards and an event called More Than Games, which we're going to be holding in Glasgow. And then we're putting out a call for partners, and we want to hold fringe and satellite events across the whole of the country. So the Highlands and Islands, the borders, out into the wilds, because, you know, games are online, they're absolutely everywhere, and really celebrate the diversity and the incredible creativity and talent across the country. And then hopefully, you know, potentially we can really tap into some of the expatriate communities, the diaspora out across the world, and have Scottish Games Week going out and happening internationally in the future. So that's a big part of it. And then, as I say, I'm working with some friends at various organisations, including the University of Glasgow, to really try and pull this lighthouse organisation, this cluster together in a way which I don't think has really been done in any other regions or countries around the world. So it's a busy old time, but there's a lot happening, and I get to work in video games. So, you know, what can I say, Joanna? It's better than having a real job.
That is a real job. That is. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. I absolutely loved it. Where can people keep up with you? Where can they keep up with the Scottish Games Network? I'm
very glad you asked. So the Scottish Games Network you can find at scottishgames.net. I get an awful lot of people from America writing to tell me that I'm missing all of the key events, the hammer throw, the caber toss, all, you know. I'm like, it's not that sort of Scottish Games. But scottishgames.net is where you can find me and everything else. We're out across all of the social channels. I am on Twitch, albeit I haven't actually broadcast anything yet, and we are on YouTube, but it's early days. As I say, 52 years old, so I'm having to find some young people to help me ease me into the live streams. And yes. Podcasts are about as exciting as I get right now, but I'm working on that. And then Scottish Games Week, you can sign up for all the latest news and events. We're having the entire website overhauled and made far more fun and interactive, but that's gamesweek.scot, so gamesweek.scot. And feel free to track me down, find me on social media. I'm not difficult to find. Yeah, I'd be delighted to hear from anybody who listens into the podcast, who wants some more information, or just generally wants to know more about the game sector in Scotland.
Well, thank you again so much for taking the time to speak with us. Again, this has been the St. Andrews Society of Los Angeles podcast. It has been an absolute pleasure.
A total pleasure. Thank you so much, Joanna. It's been great to speak to you. Thank you for the invitation to come and join you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the St. Andrews Society of Los Angeles podcast. For more information on the St. Andrews Society of Los Angeles, visit www.standrewsla.org. And don't forget to like our Facebook page, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube channels as well. Have a great week, and we'll see you next episode.